Long before it ever released into 1.0 on October 22, 2022, Ponkel's Vampire Survivors had already cemented itself as one of the greatest action roguelikes of all time. Not only did the title perfectly capture the addictive just one more run nature of the best games in the genre, it also helped inspire a legion of imitators hoping to follow in its footsteps, inadvertently creating the bullet heaven or survivor-like subgenres. Now, reverse bullet hell action roguelikes are practically a dime a dozen, which can make it somewhat difficult to pin down which ones are worth your time. While there's a strong case that Vampire Survivors remains both the first and the best, and also happens to be your best bet in terms of bang for your buck, there are plenty of other bullet heaven games that are just as fun and offer unique approaches to enemy types, build variety, and meta progression. Koei Tecmo recently revealed and then shadow dropped the excellent Dynasty Warriors roguelike Warriors Abyss, and in honor of its release, we've decided to go back and take a look at 15 bullet heaven games we think are worth checking out in order of their release date. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Kicking things off is none other than the bullet heaven subgenre's originator. Vampire Survivors is arguably still both the first and the best game in the subgenre, laying the groundwork for the myriad titles following in its wake and still offering players the most value for their gaming dollar. It's not hyperbole to say that there are potentially thousands of hours of gameplay you could squeeze from Vampire Survivors, and each of them would be time well spent considering how perfectly this game nails both its within-run progression and meta progression. Not to mention a plethora of excellent licensed DLCs for legacy series like Contra and Castlevania. Endlessly replayable, genius in its simplicity, and the obvious Game of the Year winner for 2022 were it not for Elden Ring, Vampire Survivors is a game for the ages that only gets better with each passing year. It's not often that a game comes around and invents its own subgenre, but when those titles do pop up, it usually doesn't take long for other developers to stand up and take notice, following suit with their own projects attempting to replicate their success. Both the first survivor-like, and still one of the best, is Soulstone Survivors, which does enough different from Vampire Survivors to help it stand out as a worthy pickup, even if you're hundreds of hours deep into Ponkel's now legendary action roguelike. The main pull of Soulstone Survivors is its heavy leaning into RPG mechanics and progression, with large skill trees to fill out for each of the many classes on offer, and plenty of unlocks to discover in each run. It also doesn't hurt that Soulstone Survivors definitively sets itself apart from a lot of other bullet heaven games, with its excellent World of Warcraft-inspired visuals and color palette, making it a game that's easy on the eyes even when it's beating you down with endless waves of enemies. One of the first true competitors to try and snatch Vampire Survivors' crown for bullet heaven supremacy was Flan's 20 Minutes Til Dawn. Part of what makes 20 Minutes Til Dawn so special is its muted visuals, which call to mind something that might have originally been released on the Game Boy Color thanks to its monochromatic color scheme and effective splashes of red. Its pulsing soundtrack also perfectly suits the intense on-screen action and does a great job of getting you in the zone, achieving that sought-after flow state in those perfect runs where the RNG happens to play nice. While Vampire Survivors and similar games tend to stick to enemy types and settings that are well-tread territory, 20 Minutes Til Dawn also distinguishes itself from the competition by focusing on eldritch horrors for its enemy hordes, placing it as the only Lovecraftian bullet heaven game that I'm aware of. 20 Minutes Til Dawn plays great, looks even better, and offers a rewarding sense of progression from run to run. To underestimate Brotato simply for its cartoonish visuals and admittedly lackluster presentation in comparison to other bullet heaven games would be a grave mistake, as it's hands down one of the best games in the subgenre. As one of several different mutated potato-like beings, you head into a small arena a fraction of the size of levels in other bullet heaven games, and take on wave after wave of increasingly deadly enemies. Of course, you're not alone, and a steady stream of mutations and equipment upgrades in between each wave is all that stands between your potato's survival and its mashing. Like the Binding of Isaac before it, Brotato is impressive for how much variety it offers to players in its builds and strategy, ensuring that no two playthroughs are ever the same unless you engineer it that way. Despite it still technically being in early access, there are many other bullet heaven games in 1.0 that struggle to have the kind of content variety and depth that Death Must Die has. Unlike previous bullet heaven games that shepherd players down specific upgrade paths based on their character and gear selections, Death Must Die introduces some new wrinkles to how progression works in the form of Hades-like gods that grant specific boons or abilities, and a fully fleshed out gear system. Together with its strong writing, excellent visuals, and satisfying gameplay loop, Death Must Die is already one of the better games in the genre well before hitting its full release, with each character feeling surprisingly different and incentivizing experimentation until you find the right fit for your playstyle. To say that there's no other bullet heaven game quite like Picayune Dreams is an understatement. This late 2023 entry into the burgeoning subgenre takes some fascinating liberties with its presentation and visuals to immediately distance itself from contemporaries, all while offering up some of the most satisfying gameplay this side of Vampire Survivors. Notably, Picayune clearly embraces the bullet heaven subgenre's origins from bullet hell shmups by adhering closely to that school of design, where routing and positioning are just as crucial to survival as the amount of damage you can put out. Aside from that though, it's worth mentioning that Picayune Dreams is bursting with personality, atmosphere, a compelling narrative, and its soundtrack is an all-timer that makes it difficult to put down, even when a run isn't going your way. As someone who loves Deep Rock Galactic, a bullet heaven survivor-like set in that universe was like a dream come true, so it should come as no surprise that I have almost 100 hours logged in Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. Like the best bullet heaven games do, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor adds its own unique wrinkle to the genre through the introduction of a surprisingly deep digging and resource collection metagame, where most of the player's more meaningful meta progression is tied to doing as much digging during missions as you do laying waste to hordes of bloodthirsty bugs. But therein lies Deep Rock Galactic Survivor's greatest strength, as you're bound to almost always gain some meaningful sense of progression no matter how successful you are in a run, making the next one even more satisfying. Nordic Ashes has a lot going for it as one of the newer bullet heaven games to officially hit 1.0. Between its excellent hand-drawn visuals, Norse mythology setting, variety of classes, and brevity of its runs, with most full attempts lasting roughly 10 minutes versus the traditional 30, Nordic Ashes is a game that ticks a lot of the right boxes for the genre. It also happens to value players' time by offering up a steady stream of upgrades that never make the game too easy, but still provide a sense of meaningful and rewarding progression. The best bullet heaven games deliver that steady dopamine hit that our brains crave, and Nordic Ashes does just that without requiring too much of players' valuable time. The first Hive jump was a decent enough side-scrolling run-and-gun roguelike that dabbled in Metroidvania elements before that formula was perfected with Dead Cells, but it largely failed to land with most players for a variety of reasons. So for the sequel, developer Graphite Lab went back to the drawing board, gathering the assistance of 2 other teams to re-envision Hive Jump as a top-down, bullet-heaven action roguelike. The result is Hive Jump 2 Survivors, and it was clearly the right move for the franchise, as it's better than the first Hive Jump by a country mile, and it's one of the better games in the growing bullet heaven subgenre. Hive Jump 2 wisely retains the appealing retro-inspired visuals and aesthetic of the first game, while changing up its gameplay to something that feels like a more natural fit than a Roguevania, and its bargain price only sweetens the deal. After wowing players with their excellent first bullet heaven game, Bone Razor Minions, solo developer Chaos struck gold a second time with the phenomenal Void's Vigil. Like Bone Razor Minions, Void's Vigil utilizes a retro pixel art style with a vibrant color palette that jumps off the screen. Only it swaps its predecessor's gothic, RPG-style setting and enemies for something decidedly more cyberpunk. Outside those visual differences though, Void's Vigil is every bit as compelling an action roguelike bullet heaven game as Bone Razor Minions, perhaps even more so. It offers up a substantial challenge, especially before players begin to unlock some of the more meaningful meta upgrades that become available, and it's an uphill climb worth making to see how rewarding the game gets once you progress along its power curve. Halls of Torment is basically what you would get if you crossed the original Diablo with Vampire Survivors, and that's a combination that has endeared thousands of players to the title well before it hit 1.0 last September. Following its year-long early access period, Halls of Torment is now in the best state it's ever been, and it's one of the few bullet heaven games to offer up as much depth as Vampire Survivors, even if it only has a fraction of that game's playable characters. Each class in Halls of Torment feels different from the next, incentivizing players to experiment with different playstyles and builds to find the right fit for overcoming each of the game's many challenges. And just when you think you've seen everything the subgenre has to offer, Halls of Torment introduces some surprising wrinkles to its moment-to-moment gameplay through puzzles, side quests, and lore dumps that players can uncover in each of the game's biomes. Entropy Survivors is one of the few bullet heaven games to spin off from another action roguelike, in this case the Risk of Rain 2-like Shoulders of Giants, and it brings its predecessor's core mechanic in tow. Instead of controlling one character, Entropy Survivors puts you in charge of controlling a sword-wielding mech and a fast-shooting frog that rides on its back, which gives the game its own unique feel along with an impressive amount of variety and customization toward how you build out each character. Like Deep Rock Galactic Survivors, Entropy Survivors is a strong bullet heaven game that makes great use of its IP and delivers some very rewarding meta progression that makes each run feel like a significant step up from the last. Aeternum Game Studios' Eden Survivors is a bullet heaven spin-off of the studio's excellent Eden Genesis, which itself is a precision platformer carrying over many of the mechanics seen in the studio's much-loved Metroidvania, Aeterna Noctis. Outside of those connections, though, Eden Survivors is a vastly different type of game for Aeternum Studio, and a commendable first crack at a bullet heaven action roguelike. Players control one of a small handful of mechs in Eden Survivors, needing to simultaneously manage a growing arsenal while balancing the mech's power output, creating a unique risk-reward dynamic where players can forego the power necessary for shields to become a destructive glass cannon against enemies. Even in early access, there's a lot to dig into with Eden Survivors, and its unique setting and visuals help it to stand out in a very crowded space. Jotunnslayer Hordes of Hel just released into early access in January this year, and already it's shaping up to be one of the more promising new entries into the growing bullet heaven subgenre. Like Nordic Ashes, Jotunnslayer makes great use of its Norse mythology-inspired setting for some cool classes, upgrades, and enemy types. Unlike Nordic Ashes, though, Jotunnslayer opts for a more grim and photorealistic visual style, which does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to creating the game's atmosphere. Like Death Must Die, players get to choose from a randomized pool of divine buffs and abilities at each level up, and seeing how these different boons cater to each of the different classes' playstyles is just half the fun, the other half being the incredibly rewarding meta progression on offer through some robust skill trees that players can allocate points to, even after incomplete runs. The marriage between Dynasty Warriors' Busu elements and Vampire Survivors' bullet heaven gameplay is such a perfect fit that it's a wonder no one has tried it before. Thankfully, Koei Tecmo saw fit to follow up this year's excellent Dynasty Warriors Origins with a bit of a victory lap in the form of Warriors Abyss, a brand new bullet heaven action roguelike that's pretty much exactly what it says on the tin: Dynasty Warriors meets Vampire Survivors. While I'm only a few hours into Warriors Abyss at this point, it's already impressive to see just how much content is on offer in terms of its unlocks and meta progression, and the satisfying sense of advancement from run to run is palpable, getting just a little bit deeper into each circle of the underworld with each attempt. Just talking about it has me already wanting to go back and play more, and that's probably the best endorsement you can give to a roguelike. That does it for our picks of 15 of the best games in the bullet heaven subgenre. Let us know your favorites in the comments below, and click the link in the description to head on over to cheatcc.com to read the full article. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ding the notification bell for more content from Cheat Code Central.